what's up guys? My name is Zach and today I am driving a 1986 Pontiac Fiero GT. Behind me is a 2.8 liter V6 and down below is a 5-speed manual transmission. Now I am super excited to be driving this Fiero GT because it's been several years since I've driven a Fiero. I have reviewed one here on the channel before, and I think since then I have a lot better of an idea of what this era was like, what was going on politically, what was going on in the auto industry, and so I always like to revisit cars after several years to sort of re-up, challenge, and maybe change some ideas that I might have held previously. So go check out my other Fiero review as well. Huge thank you and much love to Austin for that one. But today we're driving Mike's 86 Fiero GT. So huge thank you to Mike, the retro realtor, for letting me take out his Fiero. We'll talk about his YouTube channel and such at the end of this video. And if you would like to submit your own vehicle, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form, takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. But let's get back to that 2.8 liter V6. Well, there were two engines offered here in the Pontiac Fiero throughout its entire run. The first engine that they offered was a 2.5 liter inline 4 known as the Iron Duke, and that is literally a mail truck engine. The Grumman LLV that is America's mail truck is powered, at least most of them, by a 2.5 liter Iron Duke inline 4. However, that engine had some fire issues, was really underpowered, made under 100 horsepower, and so they stepped it up in 1985 to the 2.8 liter V6, which is this engine. This was also pulled out of like the Chevy S10 and other V6 applications of the era. And I honestly think it's a great power plant. It works well, it does the job, and whatever's gonna keep me from catching fire, I'll take. Like I said, paired to it is a 5-speed manual transmission. Now this was changed halfway through 1985. Previously it was a 4-speed, now this is the 5-speed, and I like it. It actually drives and shifts like a more modern 5-speed manual, and I didn't quite expect that out of GM. GM and modern don't tend to go together, especially in this era, so that's very impressive to see. Last but not least, of course, the Fiero is rear-wheel drive. So how does it feel to drive a Pontiac Fiero GT from 1986? Well, first thing you notice is that you're really low to the ground. This is a low-slung sports car, and that's what GM was going for. Visibility is wonderful because it is an 80s car. I love all the gauges, switches, and dials looking at me. Steering is actually very spot on and very responsive. The car feels chuckable and light enough, and this car gets ragged on for not being an amazingly fun car to drive, and I genuinely don't see where people get that feeling. This car is wonderful. It's fun to chuck around, even these Wisconsin roads here in the winter. So honestly, Fiero is a total win in my book. That's stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have 4 gauges. Off to the left is my speedometer, off to the right is my tachometer, and in the center, I get my coolant temperature and fuel. Very, very 80s, as you'll notice throughout the rest of this interior. I have these sort of exposed bolts. Now, I've been told both ways that they're real and that they're fake. So you could be the judge, I don't know, but it was very stylistic of this era. The Fox Body Mustangs did a similar look as well. Off to the left, I do have my parking lights and headlights, 2 climate control vents, and moving out of the door, we have the latch to get in and out and power locks. Moving into the center, we get our battery voltage and oil pressure gauges, as well as 2 climate vents. Our climate controls, very simple, although this did come with factory AC. Love to see that, and it still blows cold. And we have our aftermarket radio, because any radio from the 80s is not going to keep up with modern tech, so you gotta swap it out. But off to the right, we have one of the most 80s features of all, which is a car phone. Absolutely love seeing this. Very, very cool. I don't 100% know if this is a factory phone or not, but it is cool nevertheless. And here it is. Moving into the center console, first of all, we get this little tray for some trinkets or whatever you might have. The shifter, which is large and in charge, as you can tell. It is not here to mess around. It is chunky. It is not super friendly, but hey, it works. We have 2 ashtrays, one on either side. God bless America. And then down below, we have our power window switches and our shift pattern for the Fiero GT. Then we do have a cigarette lighter on the center console, but you don't actually get any storage in the center console up until you move upwards to the right of your shoulder. You get a little glove box of sorts. Very, very interesting placement here in the Pontiac Fiero. Through all of this, we don't have any cup holders. So predictably, but we still got to test it, predictably, the 1986 Pontiac Fiero GT fails the big friggin' bottle test. Now, the seats are really comfortable. I've said this in pretty much all of my reviews, but GM of this era really knew what they were doing when it came to seat comfort in the 80s, and so they did not leave the Fiero out. It is very comfortable and plush here. However, we don't have any back seats. We do have some interesting trunk space, so we'll go take a look at that. Apologies for the wind noise in advance, but because this is a mid-engine vehicle, we do have some storage space actually up front. So, not a whole lot. We do get a spare tire and a giant jug for the windshield wipers. But other than that, yeah, I guess you could put a couple things in here, maybe a blanket for some cars and coffee events, but that is the front area of the Fiero. However, let's release this. There we go. Put that down. Come around the back. This is still a GM after all, so square key for the ignition, round key for the trunk. They didn't leave that out when designing the Fiero. And this is the trunk that you get. Now, obviously, that's the engine, but you do get a little trunk back here. I wouldn't recommend putting ice cream back here or an ice sculpture or anything you don't want to get a little toasty. I know that there is insulation, but it doesn't do the best job. But that is the rear trunk space and cargo space of a 1986 Pontiac Fiero. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and how can you not love the look of the Fiero? Very, very unapologetically 80s. It looks like a Trans Am met a Porsche 944 out for a couple drinks one night, and somehow the engine ended up in the back. I don't know. It's very interesting. And to me, these are just so iconically 80s. The pop-up headlights, the mid-engine, the manual, all the sort of dials and switches in here. It all really plays together to give you this very, very retro feeling. And so, with that stuff out of the way, all of that being said, bada bing, bada boom, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving a Pontiac Fiero GT from 1986? Well, I really love the experience. I genuinely don't understand why people dislike the driving experience. You have to remember that this isn't a Toyota MR2. You have to remember that this isn't a Mazda RX-7. This was made by an American company in the 80s, where most of their middle names were Slushbox. This is impressive for GM. But what I wanted to talk about was kind of the reasoning behind the Fiero. So, if you haven't seen it on my channel, I have a video about the malaise era, which was from 1973 to 1983. And basically, it's talking about the oil crisis, the emission standards, the safety standards, all coming together that made cars very, very boring in this era. They had a lot of harsh restrictions they had to follow. And so there wasn't a whole lot of creativity because there wasn't much room for it. Well, coming into the 80s, those restrictions were starting to be lifted, the malaise era was starting to end, and so car companies could have fun again. The issue is that the malaise era took a lot of money away from the big three automakers because they had to change everything. So in the 80s, there were a couple of gambles, most notably the Ford Taurus. Ford kind of hedged their bets. They didn't have a whole lot of money, and they said, hey, let's make this car, and it ended up being successful. GM did a similar thing with this Fiero. They weren't sure it was going to work. They wanted to produce an economical sports car, which at the time hadn't really been done before. So they took that reliable little Iron Duke out of the Pontiac Phoenix / Chevy Citation, chucked it into the back of this, and called it a day. And luckily, it was semi-successful. The Fiero sold well, or well enough at the start, until they had engine fire issues, which sort of plagued the car as a whole. And then after that, they only really lasted until 1988, where they were canceled for the 1989 model year. So this car was an American car that was born out of because we can. They took the parts that they already had, they knew worked well. The Iron Duke, as much as people love it or hate it, it was a reliable engine at the time. And they made something fun. That's the thing about the Fiero, is that it's just fun. It doesn't feel like it's trying to check a box. It doesn't feel like GM had their hands tied and they had to make something like this. No, they made this because they wanted to make an economical sports car. And you know what? They did. This car deserves so much love and admiration for the era that it came out of. By modern standards, no, this car isn't fast, doesn't handle particularly amazing, but we're so spoiled today by modern suspension geometry and turbochargers. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Mike, the retro realtor, for letting me take out his Fiero. What a wonderful automobile. Mike has been wonderful to work with. He also has his own YouTube channel. That'll be linked in the description below. Please go check it out. He is one of the best, and if you're in any real estate needs in the Wisconsin, Milwaukee area, please, please, please reach out to Mike. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.